Ключі ось на столі.
Ага.
Буде у нас синхронний переклад.
Синхронний
Ви
переклад.
зможете говорити, так.
Добренько.
Так. І Хеміна буде говорити.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Reuters got CBS and ABC. Reuters just picked up CBS and ABC.
Категория. Нет? Тема какая? Наливай. Все, готові?
Говорити в мікрофон, або буде синхрон. Ось, і на одиничку так український
Все,
так,
є.
так, все, тоді почнемо.
Ви будете оголошувати?
Okay, dear ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to start our panel, and now we're going to talk about mind control, how Russian propaganda is influencing Crimea, how Russia blocks independent channels to get information about what's going on in Ukraine and in Crimea. And our speakers today will be Mr. Rifat Chubarov, leader of Crimean Tatars, and Ms. Emine Japar, who is the Deputy Minister of Information Policy of
I'm
Ukraine.
very sorry for correcting you, but not only freedom of rights violations, freedom of speech violations, but also human rights issue would be covered by Rifat Chubarov. And then a little bit about information issue. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. So we're going to have once again a presentation, and then we will be open for questions. And as we have simultaneous translation, I will ask all of you to raise your hand for questions and speak to microphone. And I'm passing the floor to our speakers.
Доброго вечора всім.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I'm late a little bit. Today we are taking part in commemoration events dedicated to the 75th anniversary of the Babi Yar tragedy. This is a place in Kiev where in 1941 Nazis killed 150,000 people, mostly Jews. I participated in the event with the participation of President of Germany and Ukraine, the EC, European Commission head, and when I was there, surrounded by my friends, Jews and Ukrainians, people from Latvia, many people came from all around the world. I received the news that Supreme Court of Russia in Moscow adopted a verdict about abolition of the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people. The supreme representation body of Crimean Tatars. I don't want to talk about direct parallels between the catastrophe of 1941 happened in Kiev and the decision that has been taken today. But you know that the global catastrophes of the 20th century also started with the first steps, behind which there was hatred, ethnic intolerance. I had this impression about that, and I made a post on Facebook. I have an impression that that the devil is playing his tricks in Moscow, and he is threatening the whole world, not only the Crimean Tatars, Ukraine. The entire world doesn't know what to do. Crimean Tatars are a small people who in the 20th century suffered deportation in 1944. Stalin resettled everyone from the Crimea and then came back. They struggled and they stayed outside their homeland for 45 years, and as soon as they came back, this coincided with Ukraine's independence, and they had only started to feel the integrity for 23 years of Ukraine's independence, and again Moscow came there. Somebody asks, what difference does it make, Kyiv or Moscow? I don't want to ponder about many factors, but I'd like to say that since the 18th century, 1783, all tragedies coming to Crimean Tatars were originated from Moscow. Once we had a large state, Crimean Khanship, we are people who had their own state for many centuries. And now the Crimea was annexated. Moscow turns the Crimea into the stronghold on this against the southern line of NATO. Forget once and for all. Putin's statement that Russians may have their own interests there, that they have their spiritual links, that it was the place, land from which the Russian history began, that he thinks about interests of people who live in the Crimea. These are all empty talks. Putin needs the Crimea as a territory from where he can intensify his threats to the world with the war. Today, for 2.5 years, the state-of-the-art weapons available in Russia is available in the Crimea. Missiles are there. State-of-the-art battle aircrafts are there. The peninsula, seen by Russia as a military stronghold, doesn't need population who is not loyal. People who openly, the person who stood against Russia's annexation of the Crimea, the people who did that were Crimean Tatars. During the end of February 2014 and during March 2014, they kept saying, no, this is our homeland. Who are you? Why didn't you ask us? What referendum are you talking about? 300,000 Crimean Tatars, 14%. The vast majority is ethnic Russians who were settled into our homes after we were sent away. But and there was no referendum in the Crimea. Under such condition, there was only limitation. And the world, thanks God, the world didn't believe that. But what does Putin count on? He is sure that he'll take that he can capture the world with his efforts and pressure. He thinks that time is working for him. That's why he believes that the European politicians will get tired. And to some extent he's right. Some European politicians are ready to negotiate with Russia at the expense of Ukraine's interests, Crimean interests, and interests of the Crimean Tatars. Crimean Tatars always believed that peaceful struggle is efficient. For the first time, we regretted very much the fact that we didn't get ready for active opposition. We didn't have weapons because the world didn't protect us. Nobody needed our lack of our peaceful life, our peaceful defense. In 2014, we spoke about the international law. We spoke about the Budapest Memorandum. We spoke about Helsinki Act, about Copenhagen Act, and Russia was moving forward, and the world didn't know what to do. Now some politicians are panicking, European politicians. I'd like to finish my speech by saying that we, Crimean Tatars, are just aware that we won't have the future if the Crimea stays within Russia. We should think about ourselves for the first step, and we know that they will do everything possible to squeeze us out of the Crimea. If Stalin deported us for 3 days to 20,000 people. He sent us away from our homeland. 46% perished during the first years of a famine, of cold. We know that Putin won't do that. He won't take us to carriages and send us away, but he'll do everything possible to make Crimean Tatars leave the Crimea. Crimean Tatars hold on to this land. They do everything depending on them to stay there, because it was a long way for us to come back. But what Putin does is he reinforces repressions. 17 people, Crimean Tatars, are political prisoners. My deputy is a prisoner, is in jail. Some of my people were sent away from the Crimea, and they cannot live there. And our leader, Mustafa Dzhemilev, as well. Putin is doing what Stalin did, but only using different methods. It's a pity that some politicians in Germany, France, Czech Republic, Slovenia believe that they can negotiate things with Putin. But the same happened in the 20th century. Do you remember somebody tried to negotiate with someone? And it ended up with a great war. 60 million people died. That's why I wrote that the devil is active in Moscow, and we should not only talk about it, but we should gather troops against struggling against the evil for good. I will be ready to answer your questions. I want to answer your questions more than talk. Шановні колеги, мене звуть Манджапер, я колишній журналіст. Я якраз працювала, коли кримська територія була окупована. Але я буду говорити не від імені заступника міністра, але як журналіст. Перш за все, я працювала з групою ITN, з групою англійських журналістів, які подорожували по по Криму на той час, і ми зрозуміли, що коїлося в Криму на той час. Було дуже важко впоратися з тим, що Путін казав, там немає російської армії. Ми дійсно розуміли, що за цими військами самооборони
At seizing Crimea and occupying Crimea. Rifat Taha was telling about this historic event, I would say, the culmination of this resistance, which is the 26th of February, the rally, the massive rally that took place right behind the parliament building, when more than 10,000 of Crimean residents, the majority of whom, the overwhelming majority of whom were Crimean Tatars, they crowded the parliament building and physically did not let deputies to go in the parliament building and to vote for this red carpet that could invite Russian Federation to enter Crimea and to legalize its entrance. And then 27th of February, right in the 4 o'clock in the morning, they were forced to change the scenario and to seize it and to commit the military scenario and to occupy the territory of Crimea. As Rifat Taha again told, we really expected that Ukrainian army would do something, but it was demoralized. And we knew that Ukraine did not have enough resources. And exactly what we're trying to do is to understand whether we're going to have a military resistance of Ukrainian army at the time, traveling all around. There was a story of me and my friend. My friend's name is Osman Pashayev, a famous Ukrainian journalist. In March 2014, all of the Ukrainian channels were shut off. So the tower that provided the signal of the Ukrainian TV channels, radio channels, were seized and were controlled by the security services. And when me and my colleague went to make a piece of information, a reportage from that place, which is the building of the state TV channel GTRK Krym, we were not allowed to enter, despite that Osman had all the documents that allowed to do that. Some people came out of that building presenting themselves as Moscow volunteers, asking questions, why we actually, what exactly we want to do there. We also saw some people from the buildings, just, peeping out of the windows. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, actually, and we knew that this was security service representatives who were controlling the territory. So we were not physically allowed to make a piece of information from there, and we were, and in a day after that situation, already state-controlled, Kremlin-controlled TV channels showed this situation as if we were the terrorists who were trying to attack the tower. So we understood that the manipulation started right at the very beginning of the occupation. Then there was a story with Robert Seri, the special envoy of the United Nations General Secretary Ban Ki-moon, who came to Crimea to learn what's going on and what's happening, and he was also blocked in one of the Simferopol cafeteria, Vidensky Bulochki, and he was forced to leave. I was the first one to come and to speak to him when he was blocked. He was really scared. He said that that what's going on there is something that never expected. So kind of finalizing all that stories I just vocaled, only today, we kind of, in 2 years after the annexation, we do understand. We are starting to apprehend or to absorb or to kind of try to answer the question what really has happened, because it was that much abruptly. We didn't even know that in the 21st century it's possible that one state, that is a state who guarantee our security according to the Budapest Memorandum, when we get rid of our nuclear potential, and this state was also promised to provide guarantees of our security, was ready to violate all those international agreements. By annexing Crimea, Russian Federation violated 403 international and bilateral agreements with Ukraine. And also, one of the main messages I would like to address is that today this is really a peninsula of fear. The idea of all those punitive actions that the Russian Federation tries to commit in Crimea is to get high temperature of fear. And we know that within these 2 years, there are 24 political prisoners, 17 people get lost, 11 dead. And we know that this kind of public stories where average Crimean Tatar or average Ukrainian could be the potential victim, the following victim of this repression machine, they would do these public stories just to show others that the danger is there. And the idea behind that logic is that to get rid of all those active people as myself, because I left Crimea in a year after the annexation, because I did have only two options, whether to keep silence, and because I knew that I could not be a journalist anymore, or I would be in risk and my life could be in danger. So I decided to leave Crimea. So what they want is exactly to get rid of active people, young generation that is kind of ready to publicly resist. And all those who is not ready to leave Crimea, like my parents, because they already have paid their price for their homeland, coming back from the places of deportation, to keep or to make them keep silence forever and ever. So there is also, I distributed these information pieces for you with this freedom of speech situation on the occupied territories, because there's a little bit of statistic that might be helpful for you. There are several media resources that were also forced to leave Crimea. The only TV channel, ATR, Radio Maidan, the children's TV channel Ляля, Black Sea News, Центр журналистских расследований, IPC Гражданская самооборона, Крым Хабер Аженса, 15 минут, like a chain of media resources that were forced to leave Crimea because they could not remain journalists. And today, as you might know, there are several changes in the criminal code of Russian Federation. So if you claim, if you are a citizen of Russian Federation, or if you are not even a citizen, if you were lived in Crimea when the annexation happened, they consider you as a citizen. And if you claim that Crimea is Ukraine, so you could be potentially imprisoned in jail. So Ilmi Umerov, the deputy head of Mejlis, who was publicly saying that Crimea was Ukraine, he is today also charged with this criminal code state. So he's a potential extremist. So they consider him as an extremist for just remaining a citizen of Ukraine. And they also, the final point is that I currently participated in the OSCE platform for freedom of speech together with Dunya Mijatovic, and we were speaking about absence of free media in the occupied territories of Ukraine, and the Russian Federation was very vocal and very articulated, saying that Ukraine does not have freedom of speech, freedom of media, and that there was also a representative of Republic of Crimea, as they call it, a head of Association of Journalists, as he represented himself. And he said that in Crimea today there are more than 400 media resources. And third part of that number, they provide Ukrainian, Crimean Tatar, and Russian language content, which is absolute lie. Because, yes, there is no ATR channel in Crimea, but there is another one which was established in a year after the occupation, which is called TV channel Millet. And you will never have a chance to find out what's going on or the real picture of Crimea if you watch this TV channel. Like, we have a joke in between of our journalists. If you want to be the happiest man ever, please watch this TV channel, because you will never have a chance to learn what's going on there. So this is the final point. Thank you.
Okay, so who has a question?
Thanks very much. I was wondering if I could get a sense from you how you think the arc of the struggle for Crimean Tatars is going to be. What do you think? What's your plan for the eventual liberation of Crimea, if you think that's possible?
Найпросте і найскладне запитання. Які
It's the easiest and most complicated question. What plan do you have? And when we have such questions, we kind of feel it's easy to answer, but I believe that no one will tell you that the plan that he or she has can be totally acceptable to everyone. I'll talk about my vision as to what we need to do. If you ask Crimean Tatars, we have no plan that could liberate Crimea from Russia. We are not able to do this. We are only 300,000 all in all in the Crimea, that's all. No more Crimean Tatars. But that's our homeland, and we know that Russia, staying in the Crimea, will destroy us. It will end what Stalin didn't do. Putin will finish what Stalin didn't do. Whether Ukraine has a plan. Does Ukraine have a plan? Ukraine and the Ukrainian people proceed from the fact that the Crimea is Ukrainian land, and this corresponds to all international law standards. Can Ukraine restore its sovereignty in the occupied Crimea and on some territories of the east, which is under the influence, which suffers the influence of Russia? You know that it won't happen. I won't talk about Minsk agreements, Norman 4. Unfortunately, we don't have a plan as to restraining the aggression on behalf of the international community. Today, Germany is the head of the OSCE. Germany is the chair country in the OSCE. You know why the OSCE and why and when it was created. I already mentioned Helsinki Act, Copenhagen Act. Untouchability of the borders after the Second World War, and everything that Russia has done since 2014 is directed against principles that underlie the OSCE operation. The European security is under direct threat, the threat of collapse. But you know about the principle of the OSCE decision-making process. It is based on consensus. What can Germany do as the chair country? Nothing. The Council of Security, the veto right. Russia is a permanent member of the Council of Security of the UN, and we cannot restore the effect of the international right. What can we do? I know that we have to force the aggressor to move away from outside the international right framework, but Putin does want to force the whole world to play under his rules. He expects that the leaders will get tired. I don't see any mechanisms apart from intensifying sanctions. The sanctions have to be intensified, and not only they have to depend on what will take place in the east of Ukraine. The sanctions should be related to restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is the first thing. Currently, I'll tell you what cannot be achieved. It's a fantasy. I'm a historian, and I regretfully say that the Western world, again, like in the 20th century, isn't ready to sacrifice on the eve of the war, it happened with Hitler, the Western world didn't find an opportunity to unite and lost much more, 60 million lives. I have an impression that today we are again standing on the eve of these catastrophes. We could believe that the European countries could agree to ensure Russia's embargo as to energy carriers, embargo on Russia's energy carriers, and the threat to switch off the SWIFT, the banking operation system. Putin won't come to his sense, but his environment will come and say, "What are you doing?" They will get rid of him, but we are not ready. We are not ready for this. They will get rid of him, but we are not ready for this.
I just want to ask first on we talked about how a lot of countries in Europe and elsewhere are not ready to really deal with the issue, and Reuters has reported that a lot of companies, including the German retail Metro and others, are still doing business in Crimea. I want to know what's the position, what's being done about that? Is that a subject of concern here in Kiev? And on the information side, if there's no ability of people in Crimea to get information from inside Crimea, why isn't there a larger effort, maybe backed by the EU or others, to broadcast information into Crimea from outside? That's not something that's been done often in the past. I can think of examples in Cuba and elsewhere. So why isn't that being done? Why aren't people in Crimea being given that kind of access? Thanks.
Я почну спочатку, а потім пані мене продовжить.
I will start from the beginning, and then my colleague will continue. I cannot build such an arithmetic table. We proceed from the fact that we are still managing within the framework of the European Parliament to find understanding on sanctions. Every country has its own difficulties. I will talk about my personal vision. I'm so just I'm so proud of the Merkel Chancellor. I have an impression that she is being attacked by everyone, including her own allies on the coalition allies in Germany. Let's say Mr. Steinmeier, and she is still she's still okay. I think that she feels her own responsibility for Europe's destiny and Germany's responsibility. If we are honest, it's not because many of you are German journalists. Today, Germany is playing the chief role in the consolidation of the European countries in opposition against aggressive intentions of Russia. It's true. But we know how difficult it is for the German society. It has a lot of figures, a lot of individuals who think that they need to make agreements with Putin, that they can yield Ukraine to Putin. France has quite a different situation. Sarkozy openly says that if he comes to power, he'll make compromise with Russia and he will remove sanctions from Russia. Why someone thinks that sanctions is kind of a stick? Somebody will say, don't beat Putin. Sanctions is unfortunately the only instrument to force to adhere to the international, to force Russia to adhere to the international rules. There are no other instruments. You know, Italy is going through difficult processes, but the European Parliament's consolidated position is so far seems so far insufficient in Ukraine. We would like to have more sanctions. But these current sanctions also restrain Russia. We don't know where Russia would have gone if not for these sanctions. We say that they have stopped aggression, but they are not sufficient to make Russia come back to its borders. Here is the problem for us. What about information and so on and so forth?
Approximately 70% of Crimean population has an access for the Ukrainian TV channels via satellite or internet. So I would not say that Crimea is classically isolated from, let's say, Ukrainian media sphere. Another point or another issue for discussion is that this unprecedented level of propaganda that is not today only, let's say, elaborated in Ukraine or Crimea or any other territory, whether occupied or not, of Ukraine, but also covers Europe. And I think that you also know the story of Lisa Girl. This is also a case that illustrates of how manipulative could Russian media today be. And this is exactly why Russian Federation is ready to invest that much money into the sphere of media. Because today information for them is a new type of weapon. And today information is also a part of their army. And they also use academic world, experts, education, like every single possibility to brainwash. I participated in the United Nations Permanent Forum in May 2016. That's a non-political platform where all of the representatives of indigenous people from all over the world coming to, let's say, voice their problems. And one of the official representatives of Russian Federation spoke up and said that 18,000 of Crimean Tatars received land plots. This was not true. And I'm more than sure that approximately 1,000 participants in that platform, they did not check up this information. And they also use experts paying money and making them travel all around to voice and show their own picture of Crimea. And of course, this information today is a part of this game. And I also, in every my speech, call my colleagues in Europe, European journalists, kind of asking them to keep Crimean issue in this information agenda, because as we call it, they used information matryoshka. They annexed Crimea, then they started the war on the east, then the Syria issue, the Islamic State issue, and every time when we have Syrian refugees at the doorstep of a European average people, of course Ukraine will not be interested anymore. Of course Crimea would not be interested anymore when people are dying at the war on the east part of our country. And this is a very smart politics. And I think that today Europe, together with Ukraine, should relaunch and reconsider this classic framework of free media. It's not me trying to censor. It's me trying to think that, or trying to call everyone to think a little bit of what information is today, what media is today. Because we have a lot of pro-Russian media resources here in Ukraine, but of course, Russian Federation uses this factor, saying that Ukraine is not democratic enough, having this inter case. I don't know if you are informed that about this case, or Mirotvorets case, and they use it saying that Ukraine is not democratic enough. Ukraine doesn't have a response for that, because officially and classically we are not willing to censor any media resource. We do not want to close media resources, but when we have pro-Russian agents here, so that's a question that we together have to answer for, because we do not want to be blamed of being non-democratic enough. It's really for us today, we are fighting for the European choice, and our people are dying at the war for European choice. And I think that today, when we hear from our European colleagues that Europe is tired from Ukraine, for me it's a kind of weird to hear, because I think it's our common goal to fight Russian propaganda. Thank you.
Я трошки продовжу.
I will continue. I didn't give an answer to one question. So it's clear that very many things depend on Ukraine itself. It's true. And you know that our partners are very anxious about how hard we are squeezing out ourselves things that should have been solved much faster. Corruption. In just court, an efficient economy. This is what holds Ukraine back, and which makes the source of internal dissatisfactions. But if someone studied us, had studied us for the last 2.5 years, he would have acknowledged that it was very hard with a large number of controversy, but we are still moving forward. Laws are taken in a very complicated procedure concerning anti-corruption laws, but they are adopted. Declaration systems of control over officials. And also at the same time we have scandals. We have bribery, the system which held Ukraine back for decades, the post-Soviet system, is being squeezed out of Ukraine, and we need to... we may excuse ourselves that we are in the state of war with Russia. We cannot justify corruption with the war, but we can just realize that we cannot direct much forces to the internal arrangement when such enemy as Russia is threatening us. This should be taken into consideration as well. What I wanted to focus on, we don't want to criticize our partners. We are saying that opposition with Russia is our task. We ask only for assistance where you can exercise pressure upon Russia, where you can assist us with weapons. And we have internal lessons, and we need to learn them ourselves, and we are doing it.
Was the discussion here? Yeah, thanks a lot to our participants.